Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 5th UConn Sports Analytics Symposium. On behalf of my co-organizers, Greg Matthews and Brian McDonald, and the Department of Statistics at UConn, welcome to the beautiful campus of the repeated NCAA basketball champion. My name is Jun Yan. I'm one of the organizers of this conference. Since 2019, we have been doing this conference, and many of you may know that the shining feature of this conference is our focus on students. And you've been to a conference that charges registrations close to $1,000. And how much do we charge? And have you seen any sports analytics conference that are less expensive than us? If so, that's probably us 2 years ago, right? Without further ado, let's get started. We have several people who will give opening remarks. First, Professor Ofer Harel, the Dean of College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at UConn. Ofer.
Thank you, June. I'm not used to do it with papers. I'm new to that role. I used to be the one who is sitting over there in the back and doing that research. So thank you, June. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here today to kick off this great UConn Sports Analytics Symposium with all of you today. It's an exciting time to dive into the intersection of sport and data here at UConn. We are, of course, very proud of both the men's basketball team, who brought home the national champions 2 years in a row, and the women basketball team, who this year made it to the Final Four with half of the roster. So, although I say it once and I would let it go, I don't think there was a foul over there. But it's moments like these that remind us why we love sports through both the thrills and heartbreaks. When this symposium started 2019, the organizers wanted to make sports analytics more accessible for students. They wanted to break down those barriers that often keep students from getting into this field, whether it's technical jargon, the cost, or just finding a seat in the room. Since then, the conference has become a game changer. We've been able to showcase sports analytics in ways that's easy to understand. We've given students the tools they need to crunch the numbers, and we've fostered some great collaborations between academia and the sports industry. Sport analytics is about finding those insights that can literally change the game. Whether it's helping coaches to make smarter decisions, predicting players' performance, or even revitalizing the fan experiences, the possibilities are endless. These kinds of applications of data to human experience are cornerstones to the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. We want people to learn across disciplines, to apply ideas from one field to another, and broaden the many perspectives that are brought into research. To all the students here today, I want to say your passion and curiosity are what's going to take this field to the next level. Make sure to ask questions and talk to some new people today. To our faculty and industry partners, I want to give big thank you. Without your support and expertise, none of this would be possible. So let's get going this great symposium, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Next, we will have Andrea Hoody, Director of Sports Performance Women's Basketball, UConn.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. My situation is a little bit different than I think most of yours. I've been in the practical applied field for 30 years, and I work for Coach Auriemma, who has been coaching for 40 years, very successfully, 11 national championships without data, right? So I come in 3 years ago and I'm like, hey, coach, we have all this technology. We have X, Y, and Z. Can we start crunching the numbers? I put together a group of students in the back that we crunch all these numbers of the data that we're collecting, which I'll show you later. But just on another note, be careful, right? Because my quote that I got was, well, Hootie, my eye doesn't match your data. It doesn't. It does not match your data, but my data is very important. And as he mentioned earlier, we made it to a Final Four with 6 players, and the data that we collected had an impact on how far we went, because I don't think we could have made it that far without the data that we've collected. So data is super important, and I do encourage you guys to ask questions, get involved, be students of the game. The practical part of what we do is really important, and the data is really important. So those are almost 2 different things, but I would tell you that the data saved us this year. So welcome, and thank you for having me.
Next is Elliot Schwartz. He's the Performance Innovation Lead at U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to refer to my notes to make sure I express gratitude for all the people who deserve it. Basically, the theme of what I'm going to say this morning is just gratitude and thank you. So first, I want to say thank you to June for organizing this symposium and inviting me to be a part of it, as well as Brian McDonald, professor at Yale, and Greg Matthews, professor at Loyola in Chicago. So they gave me the opportunity to join them in organizing the data challenge for this symposium. So I'm the one that proposed it, and I'm really excited about the amazing work that so many of you did. We had 30 student teams submit projects, which was unbelievable, like exceeded my wildest dreams, and the quality of the work was just amazing. So thank you to all the students who worked on it. Thank you to the professors who encouraged them and supported and coached them. We at the USOPC, we are not funded by the government, so we're a relatively small but mighty organization with a big brand. So we really rely on talented people like you across the country to support our efforts and support Team USA. So thanks to everyone who worked on it. Amazing job. If you want to hear more about the USOPC and how to get involved with Team USA, come talk to me. Come talk to me about anything for that matter, your career, your interests, what it's like to transition from a non-sports career to a sports career, like anything at all. Like I was you once upon a time and I still remember. Now I'm old, but I'm really happy to talk to anybody. So please approach me and tell me your story, and anything I can do to help, I'm happy to do it. Connect with me on LinkedIn, anything at all, I'm here. Let's just say, I love the student focus of this symposium. You know, the quality of the work is amazing, but the fact that students are really encouraged to attend and submit work and present posters is just outstanding. I love that aspect of this. And the 3 finalists in the undergraduate high school category and the graduate student category for the data challenge are presenting posters today, along with 25 other students or teams. So please be sure to check those out. The work is amazing. The other person I need to express gratitude to is Zafeng Min. So Zafeng, please raise your hand. So Zafeng made the data challenge possible by creating the data set. So I basically sent him a whole bunch of PDFs, which is really typical in international sports. And Zafeng scraped them all with a ton of effort and created the data set that you used for the project. So Zafeng, thank you so much for your great work. And I'll stop there, but thank you so much for having me.
Brian McDonald is one of the co-organizers of the conference, and he started with back in 2019 when he was at ESPN, and he's an important figure of this conference. He's been chairing the poster sessions and the data challenge sessions, and he's done tons of work. Now at Yale, Brian, and Brian has educated so many students in statistics and data science. The poster sessions today, we will see many entries, many participants, poster presenters from Yale. Brian?
Thank you, June. Good to be here again for, is it the 5th? I don't know how many we've done because we skipped a year also and switched the timing, but maybe the 5th UConn Sports Analytics Symposium. Yeah, great to be here today. Very excited for all of the presentations, and as Elliot was talking about, all the posters that we have at lunchtime from 12 to 2. Please check all those out. Lots of good work there. I just wanted to take a moment to introduce this initiative that several people are working on. It's called SCORE, which stands for Sports Content for Outreach, Research, and Education. And it's basically, the focus is sort of building a sustainable national network that creates content that can be used in classrooms and workshops and so on. That basically the aim is to use sports to get students interested in data science education who might not otherwise get interested in data science education. So if you have any interest in, this is like the shortest intro I've ever done of this initiative, or maybe anyone has ever done. If you want more information, can we move that? There is a website, scorenetwork.org. There's this email address if you're interested in being involved, scorenetwork.org@gmail, and then there's the X/Twitter and LinkedIn handles, also scorenetwork.org. If you want to hear a little bit more about it, you can come talk to me. You can also come talk with Michael Shuckers, the handsome young gentleman over here, who will be filming videos of some of our speakers today at various times during the day, just sort of asking them questions, little mini interviews to help motivate some of the modules that we'll create through this SCORE network. So there will be sort of written content, but then a lot of these modules will have video introductions to them. So he's working on that a little bit today. And yeah, that is it. Thank you, and welcome to the conference, and enjoy.
Thank you, Brian. This concludes our welcoming remarks. Greg, your show.
Coming in hot. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to introduce the first speaker, but before I do, I'd like to reiterate what Elliot said about if you're a student, come talk to us. I feel like I've been to conferences before in with other fields, and I remember being a student and I walked up to someone and I would be like, hey, I really like your work. And they were like, oh, I got to go to lunch or whatever. And they kind of ignored me, and I'll never forget who they were. I won't say who they were, but I remember who they were, and I'll always remember it. But it's not like that in sports. Like every conference I've ever been to, everyone wants to talk to you. It's super friendly. It's kind of not like other sort of subfields of statistics, but like literally everyone here will talk to you, and don't be shy. Just go ask questions. All right. So meet everyone. That's kind of the point of this thing, is to meet people at this conference. All right. I'm now going to introduce the first speaker. Am I doing okay? Okay, good. June taught me math stat. He's one of the greatest professors I've ever had. You were pretty good too, Ofer. All right. All right, I'll introduce the first speaker. Esteban Navarro Garaiz is a technical product manager for the baseball team at Zelus Analytics, a role in which he collaborates closely with a team of 20 data scientists and engineers, overseeing the development and implementation of the team's roadmap, supporting client integration, and mentoring junior team members. Before joining Zelus Analytics, Esteban spent 2 years as a quantitative analyst with the Los Angeles Dodgers, winning the World Series in 2020. We can clap for that. Yeah, I'd say so. He graduated with a master's degree in data science from New York University, where he is a DeepMind fellow and a Fulbright Garcia Robles Scholarship recipient. Let's welcome Esteban to the stage.
Good morning, all. How are we doing? I know it's early. You can do better than that. Come on. Hard to follow Grant with that energy, but I'll give it a shot. I'm very happy to be here. I'd like to take a second to ask for another round of applause for the organizing committee. I think, yeah, You know, the mission of making a student-driven and student-focused conference is not lost on me. I grew up in Mexico and I didn't really have a lot of access to these opportunities. So it might surprise some people in the audience that the first sports conference I was able to attend was last year in person. And it was sort of, you know, hard to find content and opportunities to network with industry folks, like Greg was saying. And so I strongly encourage you to take advantage of those today. Unfortunately, I'll be leaving right after this because I have to go back to Mexico City for a wedding. But here's my website and my Twitter. You should please contact me after the conference. My email is in there as well. I'd love to talk to you about anything sports analytics related. The other thing that will be on my website will be the slides that I'll be sharing today. So hopefully you can focus on the content more than the note taking. And with that, we'll get started. I'll skip over a little bit of me because Greg already did this, but sort of I studied math in Mexico City and was lucky enough to get a couple of scholarships to come over to the US and do a data science master's at NYU before joining the Dodgers, where I was very, very lucky to win a World Series in the couple of years that I was there, which I do not take for granted. You know, there's people that spend 30 years in the industry and don't get to do that, and it was very, very fun. And after that, I joined the team at Zelus Analytics, and I'll tell you about that in just a second. So the cool part about winning a World Series is you get a World Series ring, which is now sort of like a token I get to take everywhere and sort of bring out of storage whenever I'm having a bad day and I need some motivation. So another cool aspect of sports analytics and a potential motivation to join the industry. I want to spend a couple of minutes talking to you about Zelus Analytics. So Zelus is this company of amazing people that used to work in academia or in sports teams and have started sort of supporting teams around the globe. We work with teams in all of these leagues. In particular, I work with MLB, but we work with teams in the NFL, the NBA, soccer in Europe, hockey, cricket, golf, and recently esports. So we'd be very excited if you would consider sort of us as a good landing spot for your future sports analytics career. And I'll tell you a little bit about Zelus Baseball. So we work with up to one team per division in MLB. So if you've heard from us, you've probably heard that. But we also do a lot more stuff. We're starting to expand internationally to work with teams outside of MLB. And my focus recently has been on college baseball and sort of getting that space going. So if you work with a college team and trying to crunch wins out of data, I'd love to talk to you. We're starting a data engineering as a service product, which sort of helps you not have to worry about all the cleaning and stuff and just focus on model building. I think that's going to be very useful. And lastly, like if you're not a team, but you're interested in evaluating players, we'd love to talk to you. We have products for you. Okay, thus concludes the advertising. So I want to leave everyone in the room today with a little more idea of how baseball analytics got started, sort of where we are now, and what open problems we have that may be of interest to attack in the future. In a way, baseball analytics is sort of like a sports analytics history as well, because it's probably the most mature sport, certainly the one with the most work and most people in the industry involved. So we define baseball analytics as data-driven tools to improve decision-making and gain a competitive edge. I think the last part of that sentence was sort of not really known at the beginning of sports analytics, but has certainly been proven with the success of teams that have adapted this. And you could really generalize this to a sports analytics 101, if not a baseball analytics 101. So some of these tools are used in roster construction. So this is probably the most mature area, right? Like I'm trying to compare between players to think about whether it makes sense to acquire a player or to sign them to a long-term contract extension. I want to be able to optimize the resources I have to make my roster better. And I want to think about if I have this player in the minor leagues, like should I bring them up to MLB now? Can they help my team as is? We also do a lot of work in in-game strategy. I put two examples here, but there's many more. In particular, like how do we want to approach this game from a pitching perspective? And bullpen usage is one that is very much data-driven and fully adopted in the league. And the other is, where should my defenders go for this particular batter-pitcher matchup, which is a really interesting sort of problem of how does the spray of batted balls change for this batter and their tendencies, and for this pitcher and their pitch selection. Player development is a area that is sort of quickly developing, but still a little behind the other two. So with the growth and availability of kinematic data, we are going to sort of start to open a whole new frontier here, and I'll talk to you about that in a little second. But in general, I think in baseball in particular, improvement plans that are data-driven are sort of very much an industry standard now, whereas they weren't 10 years ago, right? So what is it in your game that you can improve to make you a better player? And what sort of KPIs should you be tracking as you're going through those improvement plans? And lastly, a huge question that GMs and president of baseball operations deal with all the time is like, how good is my team right now? Should I spend future resources trying to make this team better now and go for a championship? Or should I be foregoing contending right now to try to build a better team for the future? So we do this I'd like to divide it in a 3-step process. It doesn't quite fit here. There's sort of like a little 4th step in here, but I'll tell you in a second why I chose 3. So the first is sort of like in other areas of statistics, we want to be descriptive. So we're trying to assign probabilities to past events in the best way that we can and sort of find patterns in those best events. And we want statistics that are able to sort of summarize what happened in the past. And I think the most relevant questions for people in the room in this regard is like, what should we be measuring? When you're thinking about breaking into sports analytics, you realize like a lot of the early research in baseball is like, okay, the game is happening. Like, where should we spend our attention? Like, what kind of data pipelines do we want to build? So as you're moving to new sports, that's sort of the first question and where you always want to start. Once you can describe things, you want to predict them now. So we go from assigning probabilities to past events to future events and trying to predict them. And it's sort of like a 2-step process here. The first is called typically value attribution. So the idea is I take these probabilities, I see what actually happened, and I try to explain the residuals. Like, what part of this was just an actual residual, and what part of this was a skill from the player that's sort of like involved in the action, right? Either we could actually attribute this to the player, or we have to go back to our descriptive model and improve it to make the probabilities more precise. And then we take those value attributions where we say, hey, this player was better than expectation in this situation. And then we try to project into the future. And that includes a whole sort of plethora of interesting problems. In particular, aging curves is one that's like, you know, still very much an open problem. Like, I have this player, they have these skills, they're this age. How do I expect them to look in 3 to 5 years? Which is a very, very relevant question for the industry. And then I've sort of given this an entire new category. This is my product hat speaking, but really a lot of the meat of the problem is in the predictive step. But I really care about the prescriptive step, which is now you have this data, like how do you build a decision-making under uncertainty sort of culture that takes all of these projections and tells you like, how should I build a team? Where should I spend my attention? So the idea from prescriptive analytics is it creates actionable insights by recontextualizing models. So a lot of player evaluation is sort of team agnostic. And at the prescriptive state, you want to sort of take that back and bring it back to your own team context, right? Like if you already have 3 point guards, adding another point guard is probably not going to be as beneficial as other teams. And so this is sort of like an overlooked step that I love working in. So baseball example would be on the descriptive state, like I have a pitch trajectory, it crosses the plate in this location, like what's the probability that that is a strike? After that, there's this thing called catcher framing where the catcher receives it in such a way that they make it seem like the pitch crossed the pitch zone closer to the center, and they try to fool the umpire. So we go from this probability to actually seeing the result of the pitch and seeing, can we assign value to this catcher in saying that they're good pitch framers? And then we take this pitch framing skill, right? He's like a +10 or whatever. And then we try to project, how will this look next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And should we like acquire this player or pay them more money or trade them for a different player? That's sort of like the 5-minute version of what we do in baseball analytics and the sort of problems that I'm interested in. And we'll dive a little bit more. But first, I want to dial you a little bit back to how we got here. And I won't go all the way back. We'll go back to the 1970s with Bill James. So Bill James is this like decisive figure in baseball analytics in that he starts publishing in 1977 this sort of like magazine called the Baseball Abstract, where he's starting to look at a lot of problems in a new way. And in the first 5 years, he sort of like defines all of these concepts that are still very, very relevant today and that are still in our language and problems of interest, like aging curves, which I've already told you about, runs created, which we'll talk about in a second, sort of like which defender is, which defense position is harder to play, like how does the stadium affect what people do? So all of these things that like we're still very much trying to study and improve are kind of defined by Bill James in these first 5 years of the Baseball Abstract. Another thing that James sort of starts to think about is we have the major leagues and the minor leagues. Like how do we take minor league performance and translate that to the major leagues, which is very much still an open question. And then lastly, he takes all these runs created and thinks, how does that like translate to wins for team, which is sort of like what we use in the public sphere to evaluate baseball players right now. After James or around the same time comes Pete Palmer. He contributes sort of like the first iteration of what we now call OPS, which is this idea of like, let's get away from batting average and think about, you know, what kind of damage are people doing as well. Technical problems, 1 second. Looks like someone has their mic on. Okay. And in 1984, Palmer publishes this book called The Hidden Game of Baseball. And he presents this concept called linear weights, which I want to talk to you about. And he also sort of builds like a precursor for WAR. Okay, so here's an expected runs matrix. This is about as numbery as it will get, so bear with me for the next 3 to 4 minutes. So the idea is the baseball space can be discretized in 24 different spaces. So we have 8 configurations for the bases. We either have no runners, a runner on first, a runner on second, and so on. And we have one of 3 possible out combinations, either no outs, 1 out, or 2 outs. Once you reach 3 outs, the inning is over, and the next batting team comes to bat. And so the numbers you're seeing here are what is the number of runs that this team is expected to score from this base state in the remainder of the inning. So this is like a very simple statistic. It's simply averaging out situations where I observed this base out state and I count how many runs are scored to the end of the inning, and then I average that out. Linear weights are still very much used to this day and are sort of built in this like very, very simple idea. So that's the kind of thing I mean where like, what kind of things should we measure is like a really, really relevant question early on in sports analytics. So, okay, so I take this expected run matrix and now I'm trying to determine like, I know how valuable a base out state is, and now I want to determine like how valuable is an action in the field. So I'll use a single as an example. So a single is when the batter reaches first base safely. So here's one situation where there's no runners on out, the batter hits a single and reaches first base. Like, can I assign a run value to that? And the answer is yes, it's this. So how do we get there? I'm going to bring back the run expectation matrix, and you'll see that like we have 3 possible scenarios in which this occurred, either with 0 outs, 1 out, or 2 outs. And we know how valuable each of these transitions is because we can simply subtract the start state to the end state. So we're in full Markovian space here. And if I simply do a weighted average by how often this happens in each out situation, I'm now back to being able to determine like how valuable is going from no runners to a runner on first. This is a luxury that baseball is afforded and other sports are very much not. So the fact that you can just like take this game state, advance into the next game state and say how valuable is this transition is very much an open question in basketball, in soccer. Like the methods to get there are way more complicated, and all real advances to this problem have been made in the last, 20 to 10 years, where we start with discretizing the space and try to bring it back to a continuous, more interesting space. So if anyone is interested sort of in other sports, EPB is where you want to start for that, the expected possession value. Okay, so now I'm able to quantify the run value of this situation. I do that for all possible combinations of a single. So sometimes they happen with a runner on first. Sometimes they happen with a runner on first that then goes to third base. Sometimes they happen with a runner on second that then scores. And then I keep going with all situations. I count like how many times does this happen in a season. And then I assign weights to this problem. So it just becomes a weighted average. And now I'm able to say like the run value of a single is this number. And so linear weights concerns itself by giving run values to actions in the field. And we do this base out state neutral, right? Because the batter doesn't really have control on what's going on in the bases before he starts to perform. So that's another sort of like luxury for baseball, is all of these actions are separate one from another. And in that way, we're able to sort of like assign value to a single actor. Whereas if this happened in soccer, you would need to assign some kind of spacing value to a player moving and generating a passing lane, for example. Okay, thank you for bearing with me. That's about as numbery as we'll get. I want to talk to you about Keith Woolner. So Keith was a central figure in baseball analytics. He sort of created something called value over replacement player, which is, again, another precursor of WAR, which is how we measure player value in the public sphere. He then joins Baseball Prospectus as the director of research and development. And he publishes this article in 2000 that we'll discuss a little today, called Baseball's Hilbert Problems. So if you're familiar, Hilbert goes in 1900 in front of a conference of mathematicians and sort of presents what he thinks the most relevant open problems are for mathematics for the next century. And it's probably like the most famous mathematical speech that exists, because those problems are still very relevant and some of them are still open. And so I kind of want to go through some of Keith Woolner's open problems in 2000 to tell you, like, where are we as an industry? What have we solved? And what kind of interesting problems will come, I won't say in the next century, but in the next decade or so. Keith has these sort of criteria to include these problems in his Hilbert list. I want to list them very quickly. To be relevant, right, sports analytics has to inform a decision. And this is very relevant for folks in the room, because I think the biggest difference between public and private research in sports is, at a team, you're not really concerned with anything that can't improve decision making. And so the easiest way to match the private sphere in research is to think like, what kind of decision making does a coach or a player development analyst or like a GM have to make, and think of possible like research opportunities in that area. So as you're starting to get going with research in sports analytics, this is something I would strongly encourage you to do. It must consider the context of the game, right? We don't play baseball in a vacuum. We play baseball in the major leagues and within this sort of like company and money-making structure. A good problem is a good problem, regardless of whether you have resources to answer that problem right now. So that's something we'll talk about in a second. But Keith sort of like builds these questions thinking like, gosh, there's I'd really like to answer this, but I don't have the data for it right now. And very similarly, like reasoning is valid whether we can measure or quantify something or not. Right, like a good hypothesis to test out in the future is very much a worthwhile endeavor. Okay, so Keith builds these 23 problems that he thinks are like paramount for baseball analytics in the next few decades. The first one is separating defense into pitching and fielding. And it's funny because the quote he presents is like, gosh, these two are so together that it seems like impossible to separate them. And as we'll see in a second, we're sort of like at the point where we've totally separated these two things. And another one is he really wants to take sort of minor league pitchers and think like, how will this player perform in the major leagues? And pitching is really intertwined with the difficulty of batting phase. So any sort of like batter related statistic that you take has this problem of like, once you change the difficulty of competition phase, like how will that translate? So these two are very much intertwined, and they're solved by this new technology that comes along in 2006 called pitch effects. So pitch effects is this 2-camera system that takes 20 images as the pitch is traveling from the mound to the plate. It determines like the 3D location of the pitch in those 20 images, and then it fits the best trajectory it can to those points to give us speed, break, and location for this particular pitch. And then simultaneously, manually, there's someone in the booth sort of like writing down like what was the result of this pitch and the result of this at bat. And getting this data was revolutionary for pitching and fielding analysis. So the sort of like the most relevant portion of this is we start developing defense independent pitching statistics. The very first one is developed by Boris McCracken in 2001. And it's sort of like before this technology comes along, right? And so Boris is interested in the same problem. And what he realizes is there's a lot of statistics that only concern the pitcher and not the defense because the ball isn't really in play. So strikeouts, walks, home runs, hit by pitches are something that the pitcher controls, but that don't involve the defense. And so he creates this statistic that like is now fully under the pitcher's control. This is sort of like a precursor for FIP, which is still very much used today to talk about pitchers everywhere in the industry and other variants that are still around. So we can take that idea and bring it one step forward. And the best sort of like public research on this is called Stuff Plus. And the idea of Stuff Plus is based on a pitch movement alone, like how good is this pitch? So we take the pitch's velocity, the pitch type, the horizontal and the vertical break. And with this kind of like nearest neighbors like technique, of course, everyone solves it a little differently, and I won't tell you how we solve it at Zelus, but with this sort of like nearest neighbors technique, we can say like, gosh, this pitch that breaks a lot is really good because it generates a lot of swing and miss. And now we're at a state where we've taken this defense independent pitching and put it in like a whole different sphere, right? We're able to do it for every single outcome independent of the defense and sort of like the location of the pitch. So now we know like how good is this pitcher's repertoire altogether. Stuff is sort of like a game changer because pitch trajectories are sort of also independent of the quality of batting that you're facing for the most part. And in that way, we're able to much more accurately just take a pitcher from the minor leagues and project them to how good they're going to be in the major leagues. Another sort of question that Keith poses is about the league environment. So just think about like, how can small market teams compete when big market teams have like 8 times the budget and aren't really able to keep their players? And as you know, the answer is sort of like brewing as Keith is posing this question, right? Moneyball comes out in 2003, and it's about the 2001 and 2002 A's. And so we're really like as an industry already working on this as this question is being posed. And since then, there haven't been any like back-to-back champions in MLB. In that period, the Red Sox have won the most championships with 4, so under sort of like 20% of the championships. So there really is like a perennial mixture of contending teams. And small market teams are able to be in the playoffs and compete every single year. Sort of like the Rays are the best example of this, of taking like a lot of data-driven decision-making to a full extreme and seeing like, God, how can we compete with like a bottom 5 payroll all the time? And they found an answer and are able to do it. So this league environment is also something that we've made a lot of advancements in. Woolner didn't really have an idea of like, you know, how good are catchers? Like, how do they help? Like, is it preventing runners? Is it on game calling? Is it on like keeping an eye on a pitcher's fatigue? And once we're able to get pitch tracking, we now are able to build sort of like foundational models for strike probability, for throwing out a runner given like the speed of the pitch, its location, and how good this runner is. And like, will this pitch go backwards and let the runners advance? And now we know that the most important of those 3 things is framing by like a very significant margin. And so we're able to produce sort of like these value attributions on the run scale for catchers on framing. And funnily enough, like when you go back, there's this like very famous example in the community of Ryan Dumit, who was sort of like a good catcher for the major leagues. He played for like a decade. And when we started including framing in our evaluation, we realized like, you know what, Dumit wasn't that good a player. Like his whole career was reevaluated, and we realized that like he was below replacement for 7 of his 10 major league seasons and really wouldn't play with that skill set in MLB today. Woolner poses 2 interesting questions in market value, like how valuable is positional flexibility, right? Like if I have someone that can play all infield positions or all 3 corner outfield positions, like how valuable is that? And Doug Fearing and a collaborator looked at this and sort of said, you know, flexibility can gain you up to 2 wins in a season. That paper is one I would recommend. And Woolner is also not sure, like, how can we create a framework to evaluate trades? And we've sort of like answered this in different ways between public and industry, but there's this website called Baseball Trade Values that sort of does that. It takes projections, it takes how controllable this player's contract is and their cost. It assigns them a monetary value. It's also able to assign monetary value to something like draft picks. And then it tells you like how much money is changing in this trade and who's sort of like getting the best of it. So hopefully I've made the case that we've come a long way in 20 years. And I kind of want to move on to like, what do I think are some really interesting questions in the next few years for the industry before we open it up to questions in the room? This is a very fancy title, but it should really say like, here are my hot takes on the future of baseball. So bear with me as we start to walk through this one. And this is really driven by another change in technology, right? So MLB started partnering with Hawkeye Technologies starting in the 2020 season. So compared to the 2-camera system we had in 2006, we now have a 12-camera system in every single major league stadium and a lot of minor league stadiums. And we have just so much more data. So in 2020, these cameras were capturing a skeletal model of every single player in the field that tells us like, where are their elbows? Where's their left hip as their wrist is starting to pronate at 100 frames a second? We're now up to 300 frames per second and 29 points per each of these players. So the availability of data we have is sort of growing like crazy. Here's some graphs that I borrowed from Nick Wan. So in the boxscore era, we sort of had 10 megabytes per season. Once you get to play-by-play and you start adding results of that, you get to 500 megabytes per season. Once you start adding tracking data, you very quickly get to 4.5 terabytes per season. And then, to 5 terabytes per season. And once you start adding player tracking, you get to 30 terabytes of data per season. And this was sort of like at the beginning in 2020, but you'll notice there's a missing statistic here. It's probably closer to 100 to 200 terabytes of data at this point with the new skeletal model and all the tracking data we have. So just being able to go into this data will give us so many more problems to work on. So here's sort of like how that looks on the MLB side. They're able to have these skeletal poses for everyone in the field at all moments and animate them. We also now are able to track the bat, which is really, really exciting. And that's sort of problem number one for me is like, what is a good swing? Like, we just kind of don't know. Changing pitch quality competition from the minor to the major leagues makes hitting translations a lot more difficult, right? So if you're facing 94 miles an hour in the minor leagues and you come up and you're facing 99 miles an hour, your muscle memory is just completely thrown off. And so because hitting is reactive instead of pitching, which is simply about sort of like throwing the trajectory without worrying too much about who's in the plate, it's much more harder to say like, how good is this hitter if we haven't seen him in the major leagues? And the other thing that happens at the major league level is if you have a hole in your game, teams now have sort of like advanced scouting teams that are looking at the next opponent and seeing that hole in your game, and that is going to get exploited really, really fast. So I can remember a particular baseball prospect who could not hit a high fastball. He was a highly touted prospect, and when he reached the major leagues, like teams just started throwing high fastballs to him, and he could never adjust and is sort of like out of the league now. There's this other like really interesting thing about baseball. Like, we have so many different types of athletes and body types, and it's not like football where you have offensive linemen and wide receivers, but each of those have a different function. Like, all batters are sort of trying to solve the same problem in different ways, but the same problem, right? So the mechanics of someone that's 6'8" versus someone that's 5'6" are very different, and the way that they're able to generate strength or value are very different. So like, how can we abstract this player's context and think about what is a good swing is very, very much an open question and something I'm really interested in. Another difference between batters is some of them guess, right? It's a 2-0 count. This person has shown me the slider twice. They haven't been able to locate it. So I think there's a fastball coming. I'm going to sit fastball. I'm going to swing at this pitch sort of like irregardless of what's happening and try to guess. Other hitters just try to pick up the trajectory and react. And so like, how good are these two approaches? We don't really know because we can't really measure those. But with bat tracking data and timing data, I think we'll be able to more cleanly separate like who's guessing and who's reacting and how good are these strategies in this game context. Physical movement variance is not something that we've been able to look at or quantify. So like, you know, how repeatable is your physical motion and your swing? And how much are you changing from a day-to-day or a week-to-week perspective? Is that leading to injury? Is that sort of like exploitable? And in particular, like, I think this might have a relationship to clutch hitting. So the sports analytics take on clutch hitting is like, we just don't have enough sample size to determine whether this exists. But of course, when you talk to coaches, like, of course it exists, right? And I think there's something to it here. I think there's something about people that have longer swings that are able to get exploited when the moment gets too quick and their heart is like really, really going because they can't really rely on muscle memory all that much. Hopefully I'm starting to get you excited about the kinds of things that we're building. So number 2 is reimagining pitcher roles. So if you know something about baseball, there's sort of like a starter who pitches at the beginning of the game and tries to take this as long as possible. And then there's relievers that usually pitch for 1 inning and come in particular situations. This was a question that Woolner was interested in 2000. And we've sort of like changed a lot. We now have things called openers. That's sort of like a reliever going ahead of the starter against the 1 to 4 hitters who are sort of like the best hitters in the lineup to try to extend the time for which the starter is able to play. This might seem like the most obvious thing in the world, but starters pitch way more than relievers. And in that way, they're able to accumulate so much more value. It's not quite the whole difference in playing time because relievers come in higher leverage situations and in that way are very valuable. But sort of like my rule of thumb is like the median 5th starter is about as valuable as the best 3rd-ish reliever in the league. And so if you have a good pitcher who's sort of like 3rd or 4th in your bullpen, I think you should convert them to a starter. And there was sort of this question in the industry of like, can we make a pitcher that throws 1 inning per game throw 6 innings without giving them sort of like an off-season training? And in the last few years, we've seen at least these 6 examples of people that have transitioned from one to the other successfully and are now able to start. I kind of want to like take this one step further. So in 93, Tony La Russa tried to do this thing where he took his pitching, divided it into 3 groups and wanted everyone to throw every 3rd day for 3 innings. I kind of want to get to a world where we're not thinking about starters and relievers. We're just thinking about pitchers and how to maximize their value. So I think this is very much an open question and one I'm very interested in. I'm going to try to hurry because I'm running out of time. So number 3 is, I think the stuff problem is really solved, but then the residual between like what we see and stuff is really hard to explain at the moment. So we think some of this is due to where the pitch crosses the plate and how good the pitcher is at commanding that. Note that I've put these 2 together. They're hard to separate because we don't really know where the pitcher was intending to throw. We can have a proxy with where the catcher stood, but not quite the intended location. So like, where's the pitcher trying to throw it and where do they put it? That's one part of it. Their pitch selection and sequencing certainly plays a part here. And like how many pitch types they have is very relevant because the batter is trying to guess like what's coming. And if he's guessing between 2 pitches and 4 pitches, it's a lot harder to guess and they have to react more. So there's this like predictability versus best pitch sort of continuum. My take is people don't throw their best pitch enough, but we don't know, right? We know that like you shouldn't throw your best pitch 100% of the time because then people will guess, but we don't know where the ideal is. And then there's this like deception piece where some pitchers are able to hide the ball with their body, and beyond results, we can like not really quantify deception very well right now. 2 more to go. So how do we use data and coach players is very much an open question. Baseball has made more progress than other sports in this area. There are these trade-offs between like taking risks to improve as an athlete and added injury risk that I think are given incentives very clear for players that are in the fringe of a roster, right? If I can't improve, I won't make a team. Therefore, I'll take the added injury risk. But for established major leaguers and for stars, this is sort of like less clear. Like, should you take this extra injury risk to become better, or should you take your career, like projected career trajectory as is? When to make a coaching intervention is one question I'm really interested in, right? Like once you're in the major leagues, you're already sort of like an elite athlete. Like, should a coach really intervene or should they just let you be? Because there's a risk that they'll make you worse. I don't think we have a great answer for that. Short-term improvements versus long-term health, very much an open question. How prone are you to injury and how is that related to your workload? We don't know. There's some like rule of thumbs for when to use pitchers and when to use batters and when to give them time up, but we just don't really know. Lastly, the one I'm very, very interested in is like, you have analytics tools. Now, how do you do data-driven decision-making? Like, how do you build a data culture? And I think it relates to bringing back context to your decision-making. more flexibly moving economic assumptions in your models to reflect your reality right now, and be able to better capture the impact to your particular roster. I want to thank you all this morning for coming. I know it's early and on a Saturday. So again, here's my website and my Twitter where you can reach me. I'll put the slides up there, and I'll open up the floor for any questions. Yep. So if I understand the question correctly, the question is my job more related to building formulas? Okay, so building the formula versus understanding the formula. Sports is very particular in that there's going to be one person ultimately making these decisions, and that person really wants to understand, like, where does this projection come from? So in the early stage, in the predictive stage, where we're just building models that predict the probability of something like a called strike probability, that is going to be much more formula performance driven, right? So you'll use a lot more black boxy machine learning techniques that are simply trying to say, this is the most accurate model I can build. But at the last stage of that, at the prescriptive stage, you're trying to build really interpretable models that someone with a non-technical background can look at and say, okay, I understand where this projection is coming from. This player is good at decision-making and power hitting, but not really contact. So the answer is both. It depends sort of like where in the spectrum you are. Yes. Yeah, so the question is with things like the yips, what was the other one? And slumps. So slumps are sort of like performance variance where a batter or a pitcher just has like a rough patch. Like, how are you able to determine that with data? On the current state, what you try to do is you try to see if there's a difference between expected results and actual results, right? Is this just simply bad luck, or has something underlying for this player changed in a way that now needs a coaching intervention? For pitchers, we actually have like much better understanding of their kinetic chain and reports built out that say like, no, look, this person is now bringing their toe down, 5 frames before than last week. We should try to get their movement in control. For batters, we do not. And so I think there's still very much an open question on that end of like, is this slump driven by someone changing their swing, or is it just purely like bad luck this week? But I think we'll have a lot more tools to answer these questions in the next 5-ish years. One more, because I can see the organizers nervous. Yes, Elliot. Yeah, so the question is, if you need interpretable models, how do you use machine learning or AI in this scenario? Early in the pipeline, right, like the decision maker is not going to be looking at, is your blocking probability correct? So in that way, you want to use them as building blocks to get to a point where you're then able to build the interpretable model better. Having said that, there's a lot of like interesting machine learning techniques that are actually interpretable, or that we have tools to interpret. So something like Shapley graphs are used in the industry a lot. Any sort of like Bayesian actor attribution is very useful in that we're able to see like with and without this actor, how do the predictions change, and in that way understand this particular actor better. So there are ways of doing it, but it's still sort of like an active area of research. I'm sorry I have to run. Again, if you have any more questions, I know there were more in the room, please send me an email. My email is in that website, and I'll also post the slides there. And it was lovely talking to you all this morning. Thank you for the invitation.